Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Mike Mouton with Transportation Management Services, and we know everyone's been super involved with webinars over the last couple months. Everyone, if not daily, is at least taking part in a couple per week. So what we wanted to do today was just focus on something a little bit different, at least from the ones that we've been a part of, and focus on some of the lessons that we've learned both as planners and as vendors over the last couple months. For some of us that have actually been lucky enough to be participating in some events, and focus a little bit more on where the industry is and not necessarily solely focus on where it's going. We've all had those conversations over the last couple of months about where we think things are going to be. But I think, we're all currently in a place where we've learned some valuable lessons. And today's message is really kind of focusing on some of those lessons learned and how we can successfully operate, during COVID. And with that, I'll turn it over to David and introduce the rest of the panelists, and then we'll get started.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Hi, everybody. I'm David Blansfield. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Business Operations at the Northstar Meetings Group. NorthstarMeetingsGroup.com is where you can find all of the content and research and other information that we've been producing for decades now, and certainly at an accelerated rate during the pandemic. Thanks to you, Mike, and thanks to TMS for bringing us this timely and very topical webinar. We're 8 months into this pandemic now, and uncertainty continues to be the only certainty there is. With cases in the U.S., breaking records, a vaccine apparently near to approval, and a very close U.S. election behind us, lawsuits notwithstanding, we are clearly entering a new phase on the road to recovery. So here to help us suss this all out are three industry experts who have given us their time and their experience to discuss safely executing events during COVID-19. So with us are our panelists. I want to welcome Cara Banasch, Vice President of Sales at Omni Hotels. Hello, Cara. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you here. Scott Craighead as well, who's Vice President of Exhibitions and Events at IAEE. Scott, good to see you here today. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, David.
And of course, you, Mike, we've got Mike Mouton, who's also a member of this panel, Executive Vice President of Business Development at TMS. Thanks, Mike, for bringing us all together here as you've done. So for the audience, please note that we'd like this webinar to be as interactive as possible, and we invite your questions. So just use the chat function there for that. We'd also like to get a feel for who we have in the audience and get a feel for your experiences as well, what you've been doing, what you've been thinking. So we're going to throw a few poll questions at you. And I think we'd like to kick off the webinar with an initial poll question. So Ashley, I know you're supporting us back there. If you could please push the first poll question to the members of our audience. Terrific. Okay, so here's our first question. Our panelists have been producing live events. We're wondering if you have been producing live events as well. So since March or thereabouts, since the pandemic began, how many live events have you held during the pandemic? You could please choose one. Unfortunately, panelists, we don't get to vote, but we'll get the feedback from the members of our audience. So Ashley, I'm going to wait for you to determine when we have a quorum, and then once you've made that determination, if you could share those results back out to us and to the audience, that would be great. I'm guessing the number is going to be pretty low, but that's only my guess. Ashley, do we have any results that we can share?
We do. The poll is now closed, and about 82% of our participants have had 0 live events since the pandemic, and 16% have had 1 to 4.
Okay, there you go. So we're all living in the less than 4, and the majority of us are living in the 0 category. We've produced 2, and I certainly can speak to the experience that we've had with the two that we produced. But why don't we start with our panelists? So why don't we go around the horn with our panelists? Have you produced successful meetings since the pandemic struck? And if you have, give us a sense of where, when, and what kind of meeting those were. Anybody want to start?
I'll start for you, Dave, if you like. So, obviously as a hotelier, we've done a surprising number of events. In September, we had 269 live events. In October, we had 376. That's obviously a fraction of what we would normally do, but I think those are numbers that people find to be surprising. We also, after 8 months of sitting behind our computer screens doing cancellations and whatnot, we got out on the road and actually did 15 live events at our hotels around the country, mostly outdoor events, our own produced events, but certainly we are seeing people doing meetings that they need to do. Of the 376 that we did in October, there were, a number of product launches. A lot of what was happening were trainings. There were a number of associations that just had mandatory meetings that within their charters they needed to do, and that they did live, with social distancing. And then, some surprising things, we did it in some of our resorts. We've done incentives, which we didn't anticipate to do at this time, at all. So there have been a variety of different types of planners out there doing different types of events, and it's hard work to get it across the finish line, but it does seem to be possible.
And Cara, where would you say these are taking place? Is there any particular part of the country where you're doing more of these than less? And give us a sense of what the sweet spot might be in terms of the, kind of the magic number of the average size of a lot of these events.
Sure. So we have done events everywhere from, the Northeast, from Boston and Rhode Island and Connecticut to, Richmond, and, certainly in Georgia, we've got North Carolina, Texas, Florida. We've done events pretty much everywhere in the country where we have a hotel at this point, other than California. Obviously, with some of the state restrictions and things, certain hotels are limited. I think, so the smallest group that we've done is 10. The largest group that we've done was 800. But on average, the average size of event that we have actualized is 150.
Wow, very impressive. Very impressive. We've done two relatively small events. At one, we had about 75 attendees, and that was a hybrid event where we had over 1,000 people participate via the platform that we used. And then we had another event of about 70 buyers and sellers, a buyer event type of experience. All of them done at venues that really committed to producing safe events. Scott, regarding your members, I know you've got a range of members who have been producing events. Give us a sense of volume and type.
Sure, yeah, I've had the privilege of attending a couple of face-to-face events in the last 2 weeks. Two very different events, so it's good to see as we obviously make plans to reopen our events into next year. And of course, our work has been focused on the measures that we all have to take together collaboratively and safely reopening with our contractor partners and our venue partners, working closely with GBAC, the Global Biorisk Advisory Council, IAVM, the International Association of Venue Managers, and our colleagues over at PCMA and CISO, ESCA, in looking at our paper that we put out, first edition in June, second edition in September, which I believe everyone on the call will receive a link to, focuses on all the measures and knowing that those measures will continue to change and evolve as the science evolves. But the two most recent events I went to, one was at the Dallas Market Center. It was a large fashion, apparel, and accessories show contracted by our partner GES. And they did a great job of producing this event, thousands in attendance, made up of 3 floors of exhibits in the Dallas Market Center, the World Trade Center Dallas. All the basics were in place, temperature checks at the door, distancing signage, and a lot of really good communication before the event. And then most recently, I went to MBI last week at the Gaylord Texan, which they did an excellent job, pre-screening, on-site screening, really well designed, 4 top round tables in the meeting rooms, and really well managed. So it can be done. I've seen it done successfully in person as an attendee, and those are really positive signs for us moving forward.
Great. Any comments, Mike, in terms of what you've worked at events that have been produced during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we've been extremely lucky to continue really operating through this pandemic in multiple verticals, really. Everything from face-to-face meetings. We had an International Market Center event in Las Vegas with a couple thousand people. We've done the sporting event side, both in the bubble and outside of the bubble with Major League Soccer. And this past weekend, we actually operated a golf event in Houston, Texas, where we were moving upwards of 2,500 people per day on buses. We also, this weekend, finished the Breeders' Cup Classic in Lexington, Kentucky, where we were, again, moving people. I think overwhelmingly what we found is that with all the parameters in place, people are following the rules and playing by the rules. We all want events to come back. I'll use golf as an example. This weekend on Sunday, it was coming down to the wire with the final hole, and people that had pretty much been drinking all day and everything else played by the rules, getting on the buses. They kept their distance, and they weren't trying to work their way on the buses when they shouldn't have been, and everyone was wearing their masks. So, I mean, that was extremely encouraging from our standpoint as a vendor. I think for us, what we've tried to do is figure out where this baseline, line is for all of us to kind of meet or exceed those expectations of what is going into getting people to your events safely and home safely. And developing that baseline has been our biggest issue. But I feel like, everyone wants these events back, including the people, the spectators, the exhibitors, the vendors, everyone. So it was encouraging to see that over the last couple of days of how much people are really playing by the rules.
Terrific. There's always that issue of optics, though. I mean, if you follow social media, and Scott, you referred to a couple of events that have taken place recently in our industry, a couple of optics that weren't necessarily the most encouraging of the safety of some of these events were shared via social media. So I'm wondering if any of you would care to comment about anything that you witnessed that didn't work, and what you might suggest to help our meeting planners in the audience be aware of what didn't work and how to guard against that happening.
Well, I think one of the biggest fears everybody has, obviously, is that we'll have an incident at an industry event or at a meeting, and that it will reflect poorly on the values of our industry as being irresponsible. I think one of the toughest challenges for all of us as vendors or suppliers is that as a culture, our industry, whether we are hoteliers or transportation providers or industry leaders, is that we're service oriented. We don't have a culture of being heavy-handed with attendees. And I don't think that you have to be heavy-handed with attendees, but I do think that right now it requires a lot more communication to help people understand the guidelines. And so we've worked with planners that have needed a code of conduct. We needed to communicate more sort of know before you go, rules of the road. How is this going to work? What are the expectations going to be? And then one of the things that we have seen is that, we are social animals. And so even as adults, we're not college kids or throngs of people out there at concerts and things, but still, people have been cooped up, and when they do get back out, they're excited and they're happy to see one another. And so, just getting our teams comfortable with reminding people, about the appropriate types of behaviors. We have a tendency to want to hug. We have a tendency to want to shake hands, to communicate in ways that feel natural to us. And I think it's a big transition for us to have to communicate and remind attendees, which isn't, normally we wouldn't engage in those kinds of behaviors with anybody that's an attendee of a meeting or an event, or, that's using any of our services. And that's been a shift. We do a lot with signage and kind of fun, gentle reminders, but, our teams, will also kind of get engaged to just sort of, give people gentle, and polite reminders about things that they should or shouldn't be doing.
Sure. You want to check to see that you don't have your cell phone, Cara, next to your computer, because your audio has changed since you first joined. It's gotten a little hard to hear. So you may want to check and check that. Mike, you want to add to that in terms of any of the things that our folks need to be aware of, need to watch for?
I mean, from my end as the vendor, I think a lot of it has been education in budgeting and looking through potential options. One of the things that we found, really outside of the building is that there's a lot of various FF&E requirements that may have not existed. And by FF&E, I mean furniture, fixtures, and equipment, whether it's bike rack and tenting and things like that may have never existed inside of a budget before. But when you start lining people up and social distancing in lines and things like that, I think the education of the clients has been key in walking through some of the ramifications of social distancing and bringing in extra hand sanitizer stations and things like that. Everyone, to your point earlier, it's optics versus reality for us. And I think everyone, the main question I get, and one of the, main pieces of feedback, well, I know that's just optics. I know that's optics. But there's things that have to happen to make that work. And, you want your attendees feeling safe to give the exhibitors that confidence that attendees are going to be there so they can pay the money to exhibit. So I think, for us, educating the clients through those kind of nuances of those new requirements has been challenging, because no one wants to pay for extra bike rack and tenting and things like that. But for the events to kind of go off safely, you're going to need some of those pieces.
Yeah. So why don't we segue to that subject? Obviously there were a lot more hurdles to jump as providers of meetings today than prior to COVID-19. Who would like to jump in here and discuss kind of some of the challenges that you've had in terms of implementing these new health and safety protocols throughout the travel ecosystem, but particularly in the ecosystem that you guys control?
I can talk about what our plans were for Expo and the challenges in planning that. Of course, many on the call are probably aware that we announced to go virtual only on Monday. So we had hybrid plans up until then. So we worked closely with the Kentucky International Convention Center and all of our partners, our cleaning partner, United Services and GS and Fern, and in the in-house security company, local health officials, and certainly it's a collaborative effort, but there are some challenges that we learned as we went. And for example, queuing people to get temperature checks. Well, of course, then you've got a line of a lot of people, and you're trying to keep everyone separated and not have overcrowding. So that is a challenge, trying to figure that out and making sure that what measures you put in place to keep everybody safe don't end up being counterproductive or causing more problems for you than you would have without the measure. So it really does come down to the basics of distancing and mask wearing. And of course, the advantage that events have over a lot of other verticals, including retail, is that we know who's coming in B2B events, and we can screen them before they arrive. We can communicate with them on expectations before they arrive and screen them at the door, which you don't get that experience when you go to the grocery store or a big retailer. So I do think that's a big advantage that we have logistically, but it also has to be managed in a way that doesn't become counterproductive, or you don't overprescribe measures to the point of causing undue stress or damage to your event by over extending what you really need to do. And that's why we really rely on the science and run all of our ideas by GBAC to make sure that it makes sense. I mean, when this thing first started and people were talking about throwing out all kinds of ideas about what has to be done, for example, carpet or no carpet. And very quickly, our GBAC scientists said, we said, what do you think about this carpet debate? He said, well, as long as your attendees are not crawling on all fours, you really shouldn't have to worry about the carpet or whatever flooring there is. So those kind of things being debunked is just as important as things being reinforced that need to be done.
Right. And you referred to GBAC, Bio-Risk Advisory Committee, and we're throwing around this acronym like everybody knows what it is. But 8 months ago, I was looking it up.
Yeah, not many people.
Never heard of it before.
We're relying on new partners, and I'm actually went through their program, their individual certification program, which for a show organizer, I think is really important to have that knowledge now on what the science is and keeping up to date on that. Another skill set you have to, not one that I would have ever imagined going through from a learning standpoint, but one that I think will be necessary moving forward as long as we're in this pandemic state.
Sure. So, Cara, health and well-being protocols in terms of the F&B protocols, I mean, the list goes on. How has it been for you to and Omni to achieve these protocols?
Well, obviously a massive undertaking, right? And we're a smaller brand. And so, we weren't first to market with our protocols. I think a lot of the larger brands were a bit ahead of us because if they had operations in Asia or China where, where they might have had distribution, they obviously had some protocols they had put into place. But on the flip side of the coin, I think because we had to create our own, from the ground up, ours, we have been told are, very, very comprehensive. We have a 150 point, stay a part of safety plan that, really addresses the, the cleanliness and the safety protocols of things, the creativity around, now, how do we serve food and beverage? How do we do that in a way that is elevated, that still is, a luxury product? That's where we're lucky in our industry that, we have a lot of creative people and, it's sort of a part of our business in general to always be reinventing ourselves. So, from the get-go, partnering, I mean, listen, we've always said that in this business, it's really all about your relationships and your partnerships. We had a lot of hospital partners. We had a lot of association partners. We had a lot of corporate partners, the University of Texas and SMU here in Dallas, their hospital teams were very, very helpful to us in terms of, understanding what the equipment was that we would need to secure to be able to really, clean and sanitize our facilities in a way that was medical grade, out of the gate, trying to find electrostatic sprayers and the right cleaning products, turning to partners like Ecolab that, have been a client of ours for years and years and years, but, finding out from them, how do we, what products do we need to change in terms of what we use in our buildings and what's safe and how do we use them? And then, to the things that we would normally expect, how do you keep people safe at a registration desk, finding the right plexiglass vendors, what were the lead times in terms of being able to order those kinds of supplies? It's, it has been very, very difficult in a lot of steps. I would be honest about that, but, not unfamiliar territory to us in this business because I think, whether you're Mike at TMS or Scott at IAEE or, ourselves in the hotel business, our clients, kind of throw us curveballs all the time with unique requests. And so this was probably the, the greatest challenge that we've probably all dealt with. But I think, as we broke things down into small steps and into, different elements of the necessities to execute, everybody sort of tackled a separate part of it as a team. And, once you get through the nitty gritty of the actual safety, I think the next big piece of it is, the challenge for us was retraining people. We've always had consultative convention services teams and leadership teams, but to really pull off an event, we have to work with clients to help with a whole process of redesign and reevaluation of what the attendee experience is going to be, from not just when they arrive on site, but what does that look like, online on a web-based registration site? What do the information look like? What are those communication pieces around the know to go, know before you go? What kinds of information do people need to have to get out there? Some people just want to know, hey, do you have safety protocols in place? Other people want to read all 150 points and, understand things. So it's been, stepping away from our norms and some of the conveniences that we've had in, knowing how to execute things and do things in a very natural way, and just sort of reevaluate everything based on these variables.
Yeah, and the variables today, a week is a month, and the last month has been, a century, it seems, with all the things that have changed over the last month. How do you, panel, assess the market dynamics today? We've been trying to track the cycle of rebooking versus scheduling new business. Can you get a sense? Where is the market actually today? Your customers who are calling you, are they rebooking? And just what are the competitive dynamics that are going on in the market today? Anybody want to jump in on that?
I'll start with just from the vendor side. What we've really been having the issue with is kind of filling that void that you're alluding to, really, of knowing events are coming back, figuring out when they're coming back, and what we do right now in the planning process, and how we adapt to not just the science, but the practicalities of dealing with that science. So, as an example, to Craig Scott's point earlier about the lines and things like that, we thought we had a solution with hand sanitizers that actually read your temperature as you're going through the line, to kind of adjust to that. But we found out those being outside had their own issues with temperatures and things like that. So this void of planning within the market, and as a vendor, not trying to be so salesy and being cognizant of where the industry is today, is tough. And we want to be there for our clients and the shows and everything else. But I do feel like we are cognizant of where we are. And so when we're picking up the phone asking for business, it's not because we're not sensitive to where the situation is today, but I do think there's some value on the vendor side, and filling that void in the planning piece, because we've been through it, maybe not with your show, but some other shows. So for us, I think filling that void has been the hardest piece, and figuring out exactly when is the right time to talk about planning. So that's us from the vendor side.
When you look at the calendar and you see that, okay, we're probably going to lose about 10 months of live events, if not, probably about 10 months, 9 to 10 months of live events here in 20. And now people are speculating 4 to 6 in 21. What's the back half of 21 going to look like? And how competitive is it going to be to get an event placed in the back half of 21? And what's 22 looking like?
Well, I'll speak to that. I think, at this point, you're right. Most everybody that had to move a piece of business in the last 10 months, let's say, for the most part, has rebooked. There were, obviously a certain number of people who had to cancel for a variety of reasons, but the majority of people wanted to rebook. And so, we were able to find, solutions for, the majority of those. But, the back half of 2021, already was ahead of pace for us, for example. And so, now with all of the 10 months of backlog, we have certainly, tried to accommodate those requests and find the right spaces for those. I think there's a couple things that are going to happen, on the back half of next year. Certainly, we're going to be, a little bit pressed to be able to find space and make the right solutions work. But the other variable that we're sort of banking on is that for the balance of 2021, that many planners are, looking to host hybrid events. And, here's the truth, as a partner, we're good with that. All we want is for people to actually just move forward. If you need to move forward and your attendance is going to be off, we would still rather actualize the program. And I think when we were doing the rebookings, a lot of us as hoteliers, and I'll speak for Omni, but I know that many of my friends and peers at the bigger brands would say the same. Everybody was a little uncertain about how their groups would perform. And so there are, a lot of allowances in those rebooking clauses and contracts for, attrition and slippage and, maybe for slightly smaller events. And so, I do think that some of what's on the books for the back half of the year may not be as large as people had intended it. And I think that that's going to help us because it's going to allow us to be able to use our space and make sure that everything is socially distanced. But I also think that it's going to give us some space back in some cases that, we may be able to accommodate new demand.
Do you think, are there any market dynamics, and I certainly want to invite Scott and Mike into this conversation too, are there any market dynamics in play right now? Obviously, the requirements vary from state to state, city to city, and conditions vary, though, it's now spiking everywhere. But obviously, previous to this current time period, there were parts of the country where it was safe and in others to come together again. But does any of you see any market dynamics in play that serves to perhaps handicap destinations or where your hotels might be located geographically?
Well, there are some, for sure, I can cite specific examples. California, at present, the local guideline in California, we have a big spreadsheet. We've had to manage this, city by city and state by state. California, the guideline is, the maximum gathering is still one person, right? So, it makes me laugh every time I see that, but good for them. They're being careful. Up in the Northeast, we were seeing some, flexibilities evolve. And as the temperature drops up there and, some of those, state entities are, revisiting, what's happening in their local markets, they're having to revisit thresholds and things. So, I hope that we don't have to completely revisit, every group that we rebooked and every group that we have been working with that was hoping to move forward in 2021. But certainly we anticipate that through Q1 and until there is a vaccine, that we're going to have to stay at the table and continue to have dialogue and continue to be flexible and work with people as we have been doing. And I think we can't predict at this point. We've all stopped trying to predict, but we're ready to roll with it as things evolve. And if certain states or certain cities, end up having additional difficulties, then we're definitely prepared to, to deal with those on a case-by-case scenario.
Scott, you've got members internationally, and in Asia in particular, China's been up and running for months now. And several of your members have produced very successful large events in China. Hong Kong and Singapore just announced their travel bubble. Singapore is coming back sooner rather than later. Can you give us a sense of your membership and their levels of activity outside of the United States?
Yeah, like I said, Asia has been producing hybrid events for the most part of the year. And in fact, the platform that we're using for Expo is Swapcard, which is based out of France. So they do a lot of business globally and in Asia, and they had a lot of hybrid experience. That was one of the things that attracted us to them, because we were planning for a hybrid event. But no, I think what we need to do with that is learn from our colleagues in Asia. Our CEO David Dubois is going to be on a panel in Singapore. He's not going to be physically there. It's going to be hybrid. they're going to pipe him in, but it's going to be a physical event there. So yeah, I think bringing them together, we're going to have a large Asia Forum component of Expo 2. I believe the U.S.-based organizers are going to be very intent to hear from their colleagues in Asia to find out what they've been doing. Of course, there are some things that they're able to do a little bit easier than we can, namely contact tracing, which is something that's not really been adopted in the U.S. so much. So they do have that advantage. But yeah, they've got a lot of great experience we can pull from as we look to produce events in 2021. And as far as the market dynamics, I would say that we're all in this together. And the supply chain and the show producer markets have been equally affected adversely. And I think that we've got to just come together as an industry, work with one another, and rebooking our contracts. And I believe that is, from my understanding from most of our members, that is the direction most show and events are going, is rebooking with that entity, whether it be a destination or a hotel or convention center. So that's the trend we see, and I do think there's been a lot of coming together, and has to be a lot of coming together between show producers and event producers and the supply chain of venues and other contractors that are involved. It's such a large group of impact that we've seen, obviously, and it's been, everyone's felt the pain from this in our industry, no matter where you're sitting.
For sure, definitely. Mike, would you like to add your 2 cents here?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Scott and Cara both said, really, I mean, we are in it together. And I think what we've found is that level of flexibility has changed from where we were a couple months ago, as far as contracting and being a little bit more flexible with cancellations and budgeting and everything else. And I think as a whole, I've seen that across the industry, you know, with our vendors as bus companies and things like that. But I think that's one thing we can do moving forward is kind of just portray the fact that we're in this together, and we don't know what's going to happen in 6 months, and we're all counting on June and things like that to kind of pick back up where we left off. But for us, as we're going through this planning process, just being flexible with our clients and making sure we're looking at everything possible and walking more people than we may have walked before and things like that, and just walking through those scenarios. And again, the contracting and the budget piece has become, you know, top 2 questions I get is, you know, do I have to give you a deposit now if, you know, I don't know how many people I'm going to be moving in June? And for us, the answer is no. Let's talk through it together. So I think that's what we've seen as this whole kind of collective in it togetherness.
Yeah, that resilience has been very much appreciated throughout the pandemic on the part of organizations like yours, Mike, and the hoteliers and venues. So kudos for that. It's been a consistency throughout the pandemic that planners have reported a great deal of resiliency and flexibility in terms of their contracts. Most have anyway. I just want to make sure everyone understands on the call that this panel has put together a bunch of really helpful resources that they've been a party to as part of their participation on the EIC Business Recovery Task Force. IAEE has put together a specific white paper. So all of these various resources that this panel has sourced for you will be made available to you after this webinar. I'd love to go, you know, to the members of this audience now and just get their sense of the outcome of the U.S. election. So if we can go to another poll, please, and just get a sense of where our audience might come in terms of a quick question. The question is, do you think the outcome of the U.S. election will result in measures to help deal with COVID-19 and bring positive change to the travel industry and to the meetings and events industry? So has the outcome of the U.S. election, assuming that the outcome is what we expect it to be and what everybody has declared, do you think it will bring a positive change to our relationship with our legislators and how our legislators have dealt with supporting travel and meetings and events. Yes, no, I'm not sure, but I'm hopeful, or I'm not sure, but I'm not hopeful. Let's kind of get a sense of whether or not we see it as being glass half empty or glass half full. When you feel you've got a core, Ashley, let's get a sense.
I do. So we are all over the place. About 40% say that they do feel like it's going to be more positive. 15% said no, and 43% said, I'm not quite sure, but I am hopeful. 3% said, I'm not sure, but I'm not hopeful. So we've had a nice mix, I think, of results, and I think that speaks to just not the uncertainty of the future, which is valid.
Yep, uncertainty, but it looks like they're leaning somewhat positive, which is helpful for sure. When there's a will, there's a way, as they say. And obviously everybody's trying to will our business forward. A lot of research that I've seen, research that we've done and other parties have done, show that planners expect their immediate future, as far as live events and meetings are concerned, there are going to be more small meetings and local meetings. Are you seeing this manifest itself in your businesses, among your members and among your hotels and among your customers, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's a little bit different because we're not involved necessarily unless the event is big enough to where, you know, we're having to shuttle people in and out. I mean, that is definitely something we've kind of taken a look at with our modeling for the future is, you know, would a full city show be moved to some regional shows and things like that? You know, from the citywide standpoint, now going to 6 different cities is definitely a possibility, and I think people are tossing that idea around a little bit. But for us, specifically from the bus side, I think we haven't seen that as much, only because of our level of involvement.
Anyone else want to weigh in, Cara, on small versus
absolutely.
small local?
We, you know, the hotel business is a data business these days, so we have lots of statistics around that. But, you know, when a meeting goes local and there's no guest rooms attached, we categorize it as catering, and we definitely, you know, catering. I mean, we've blown all records off the roof in terms of catering opportunities, you know, unexpectedly. And I think that that's definitely a factor of people just, you know, doing things regional, you know, where people can travel from their homes and attend or participate. Certainly, you know, your question about the size of event, in terms of new leads, because we measure those separately from rebookings, you know, the average size of our new lead volume is definitely smaller to mid-size in nature. And right now, I mean, it's very, very short term. You know, it tends to be, you know, inside of 3 months. So people are booking when they have a necessity to book, and, you know, not before. You know, and, you know, the other element of what's a part of a lot of bookings right now is the whole hybrid concept. And I think, you know, we've struggled with this for years, our industry, and we always were concerned that, you know, hybrid might replace face-to-face. And I think this whole exercise has proven to us all that it won't. You know, we're all sick of virtual in some, you know, in some way, shape, and form. But I think that there, for planners, is actually an opportunity in this, because there's always been an attendee that couldn't participate for whatever reason, scheduling or whatnot. And for us as hoteliers, there's an opportunity for us in it, because it's a technology piece of the equation that we never really were tapping into fully. You know, we've always had, you know, AV partners and whatnot that have had the capability to be able to do virtual meetings or hybrid meetings, but it wasn't something that anybody was really, you know, fully interested in. So, you know, smaller meetings in the short term with hybrid components. And quite honestly, we're okay with that, because big picture, you know, everything ground to a halt. And when things came to a standstill, it's taking us time. And as we grow back modestly and slowly, we're able to add people back. We're able to deal with the social distancing that we need to do. We're able to, retrain our teams as we bring them back in. And so, if for the next 3 months it's, that 150 room group that I talked about, to begin with, that is kind of our average, and it starts building back towards, hundreds of people and then thousands of people, we're kind of okay with that, because if we were to flick the switch and by middle of next year we were doing thousands and thousands again, I think we might struggle a little bit with that. Obviously, our teams are ready and waiting to come back to work. But as we're learning and sort of slowly progressing back, we're okay with the slow growth.
Let's kind of put our futurist hat on here and kind of think conceptually about what's to come. What do you think is the lasting impact or legacy from this pandemic for the event industry and for your business? You want to jump in on that one?
I mean, I think, go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to say, I think the most obvious is the hybridization of our events and the digitalization of our events, which now we've had the motivation to make this a big part of our business mix from a business standpoint, financial standpoint, but also from an opportunity to expand our audiences and become more global if you have global aspirations as a show producer or owner. And that'll affect the way we, the numbers in the next year. But I believe that it'll help augment what you might want physically in the next year, but then after that, I think it'll help us grow our audiences to a great degree. So I believe that that'll be the biggest lasting impression. I think on the design of events and the size, I think time will tell. And of course, this is ever evolving, very difficult to forecast on physical event trends. And the measures that we put in place today will be different in a month and different in 4 months. And that's why this paper is always evolving and the science will evolve. It'll be interesting to me to see what sticks and for how long, as far as the health and safety measures are concerned. Of course, there's a lot of debate about masks and how long that'll carry on after the pandemic. That'll be something very interesting to keep an eye on, but also difficult to predict, I think. It seems never ending right now because we're right in the middle of it. We're about at the halfway point based on what most scientists will tell you and based on history of pandemics. And it's difficult to see the end of this thing right now, but it will end and life will go on.
I think
Anyone
for
else
us,
want to, Mike?
I was going to say, I think for us, the cohesiveness and the partnerships that we formed through this pandemic, I think will be everlasting, really. I mean, we're realizing how important every single piece of the show is. And that stems, not just from the vendors, but even, down to the bus driver. I think for us, we've been able to work with people a little bit more closely because we're all in this together and we're all trying to get out of it together. And that includes competitors too. I mean, we're all trying to figure out the best way to do this and the best way to, so I think sharing information between competitors and groups, I think will be something that we see for a while.
Well, we wanted to leave time for questions, and I see a lot of good questions are coming in, so I want to make sure they don't go. So I'm going to take them as they come. Some came in while you were speaking earlier, Mike, about how busing works with social distancing. Can you give us a bit of an overview of what your protocols are?
Yeah, for sure. So bigger picture wise, what one of the main questions we get often is, are you spraying buses down every single run, a couple of times throughout the day, whatever it may be? As of right now, we're kind of treating the day as a pod. So, we will get that group in and then we'll spray those buses clean at the end of the night so they start fresh, because once they leave the buses, they're pretty much commingled inside anyway. So that's, kind of big picture. And then as far as practically speaking on the buses themselves, we really have two different models. One for the convention and trade show market, where there's not a lot of people who who know each other necessarily, where they may be traveling separately, where we alternate seats. So each row will have 2 people on it, but it'll be person, a marked off seat, person, marked off seat. But for golf tournaments and things like that, where we have people who know each other or families, we've been doing 2 by 2. So 2 will be filled. The 2 next to them will be marked off with headrest covers or seatbelt covers that say no seating, and they alternate that way. So we have 2 different variations to the practical social distancing on the buses, but we're maintaining the space. The drivers have, in most cases, some type of plastic, delineator between them and the group behind them. There's some new technology coming out now that you can go as far to have the plastic between each and every row within the bus. So that's ever changing, but hopefully that answered the question.
Scott, we had a question for you. Can you go into more detail about the precautions that you had enlisted for Expo?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we basically used our own writings from the paper, essential considerations for safe reopening, and have the advantage of all this great collaboration from the venues, from the contractors, great partners. I've got an echo, don't I? Y'all hear that?
Yeah, we do. If you've got your cell phone near the computer, you may want to either turn it off, or sometimes the frequency can get in there.
Let me try again. Is that better? Not really, huh?
No.
I'm hearing my, are you getting it right? Or is it just me?
I don't know. We can go to another question. I'm beginning to echo as well.
Sorry, I got distracted.
Scott, why don't we have you mute for a
so that
second?
Scott can answer the question.
I'll mute. Okay.
Well, if you can answer the question, Cara and Mike and I will mute. How about that?
Okay.
Okay. Well, that sounds better. I'm not getting the feedback anymore. So we were able to use the white paper to help guide our decision making, and of course that's made up of 6 or 7 key areas. Communication, of course, is key, and so we developed a communication plan around what attendees needed to know and when they needed to know it, as far as details on what to expect. And we started with an attendee code of conduct, which was really developed right out of the EIC. So we simply took that template and customize it to our event. So I think that's the first step is, as an attendee, what I need to know, what's going to be expected of me. And we put that into our registration form, as well as, of course, the waiver of liability. We have to consider the legal and the insurance and the liability piece of this, and work closely with Butene Insurance, ideally preferred partner Butene, on our liability and risk management. And of course, risk assessment, understanding what your risks are. Every event's different. Every event is designed differently. The number of people, the types of people. We have to look at things like age, right, of your attendees, and we know this affects people differently based on their age. So there's all those dynamics that you have to think about, and then of course understanding what the protocols are with the venue. We were fortunate that Kentucky International is GBAC accredited and had all those proper protocols in place. Omni and the Marriott and the Hyatt were all on our block and all had their own protocols that we were starting to share with the attendees to, of course, reassure them of a safe experience in the hotel, and then of course into the convention center, as well as the airlines, working with American Airlines and Delta, who are our partners, to help communicate to the attendees what the airlines are doing, which there's been some really recent great news from the airlines as far as the air, in the airplane is safer and cleaner than the air that we breathe in a grocery store. So I think that reassurance, that emphasis on putting everyone at a comfort level. U.S. Travel's done a great job of helping to promote all these initiatives that the hotels have, the airlines have, and that's part of our responsibility as the show producer, to communicate all those measures that all of our partners are putting into place, and working closely with them to understand what it means for us, understand what the show producer role is, as far as screening and processing and working with the health department, and really just setting the expectations for the attendee as far as what's expected of them. For us, we were going to pre-screen everybody with a firm partner called Share My Health, which specializes in health screening. And then they were going to arrive and they were going to get their temperature checked daily and have an indicator that, indicator that they were cleared to wear every day. MPI did a wristband for their event. I think we're going to do a sticker on the badge kind of thing. We have secondary screening protocol in place. We had communication and protocol in place for any positive cases with the local medical community. So this entails quite a bit. It is a whole new planning process, and we were well on our way with our plan and felt confident in our plan. But unfortunately, with this recent rise in COVID, we were just not able to move forward.
Yeah, there's only so much you can do. Thank you, Scott. You guys have done a great job, both in educating everyone as well as showing us how to get it done. A question for the panel. How do you handle selling during this time? Anybody want to tackle that? How do you handle sales? How are you handling selling? How are you dealing with your clients, Cara?
Well, I'll share a gem with you all from Arden Banasch, who is my dad and who was in sales as well. But he always used to tell me when I was younger in sales that you don't really ever have a relationship with a customer until you've solved a problem for them. And I think, that's been something that's kind of guided, our sales organizations or any that I've been a part of. And so, through this time, we've taken the heat off. I mean, we're not pressuring people. We don't have goals this year. We don't have incentives this year. We have said, be present for your customers, be consultative, be helpful. And so really our sales teams are there as a conduit to help provide resources. And so a customer that has a question, like many of those that we've answered here today, our sales teams certainly are happy if you have a lead and if you've got a group that you'd like to book, but more than anything, we're working with customers to help them be prepared to take their next steps forward. And that's the most important thing I think that we can do with our teams at present.
Are costs being passed on to the end user? Cara and Mike, are these protocols that you are putting into place, are planners and other constituencies having to pay for them?
Mike, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it really depends on the level of, level of care we're taking in a sense that for baseline services, no, there's no cost being, passed on. But if we're adding, as an example, multiple sprays throughout the day and we're taking buses out of service and having to spray 2 or 3, 4 or 5 times a day, adding staff to wipe down high touch, high feel areas, those costs, we're working with our clients on, not necessarily passing them on, 100%, but we all have the same goal of getting back. So if we can help in any way, we've purchased a lot of equipment in the process, from sprayers to testers to hand sanitizer stations, you name it, we've purchased it. So if we can help with those pieces of equipment, we're more than willing to do it. And really it's just talking through the options. I think we're all feeling the same thing is, we would love to be as safe as possible, but there are some costs associated with doing it. And so that's where we are. I know that was a long-winded way of saying sometimes, but that's the truth. We're doing all we can to absorb that and show our value to our customers, and that's where we are as of today.
Yeah, we're in a similar place. I mean, we have the Omni Safe and Clean program, which I talked about, and most people are sharing back with us that they find it to be more comprehensive than most. And our philosophy has been we're not passing along those costs. We've got a lot of extra protocols in place. It's all of the individualization of things that ends up costing so much more. And obviously, intensified cleaning, intensified frequency of cleaning, like Mike, all the equipment, all of the products, I mean, that we've had to invest in. But, we are, committed to helping people bring meetings back. And that's, been something that we've been prepared to cover. On the odd occasion, we've had a client that has said, hey, your frequency, we'd like more, or we'd like something a little different. And so then that becomes a little bit of a dialogue if it is, incredibly different than what our program encompasses. But we have had very few requests that we haven't been able to just absorb as an operational cost.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, panel, for your time and sharing your experiences and your insights. And thank you to Mike and to TMS. And thank you to the audience for joining us. We know your time is precious, and we appreciate your giving it to us. And we hope we were able to give it back in terms of some value provided. In addition, we will be sending a follow-up email to you with links to various resources that we may have referred to during this webcast, or that we think would be helpful to you in relationship to the subject matter that we dealt with here today. So again, Scott, Cara, Mike, thank you. Really appreciate it. Keep on keeping on. We appreciate all you do. Same for all of you in the audience. Keep hope alive. We'll meet again. So until that happens, be safe, be well. And from all of us here on this panel and from TMS, we wish you all the best. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.